My experience was a lot easier than most. Due to a whole variety of factors, I could just kind of, go under the radar, and people were very helpful towards me. I didn't experience a lot of discrimination. It was still very uncomfortable, but I am very aware that I was luckier than most in terms of navigating those structures. The main issue was there just didn't seem to be any recognition of my identity. They weren't. I spoke to quite a few people asking, can I get my name changed, gender changed, on the system, because it was quite uncomfortable being constantly outed to other students and to staff. Even things like the computers. You sign into a computer, it'll have your name and title. So I couldn't really hide that from my peers, and I just didn't want to go through that every time I had to do a computer practical. There were a lot of people who were very helpful. They really wanted to help me. I could see that they were, but they were stuck in the protocols that were currently in place. So there just wasn't anything official that an individual could do to change your name, gender marker, title, stuff like that. Yeah, the bathroom issue was a bit uncomfortable because, first of all, I couldn't really access a lot of water outside of the bathroom. The water towers tended to not work. And I noticed that for quite a while I was purposefully dehydrating myself because I didn't want to use any of the bathrooms, and I couldn't really, apart from bringing a lot of water, I didn't really have a lot of access to water on campus. And that was uncomfortable, especially over the long days. But I tried to use the disabled bathrooms, stuff like that, but those were not very available quite often. There aren't a lot of them, and some of them were also gendered. So there's just loads of places on campus where I didn't have a non-gendered option. Yeah, so when I came to speak to peer, I think it was mainly the name, title, and gender that was on the system, because that meant that I was just outed constantly to other students and to staff, and it was very uncomfortable. And it also felt very unnecessary because I didn't see why it should be so difficult to have a system where, because it was taking a long time through Home Affairs, I'd already applied and everything, but it takes a number of years. And if you can keep those details on file, as you are legally required to, but why couldn't you use your chosen name and pronouns? I couldn't see why that would be impossible. And for me, a huge difference just in day-to-day interactions on campus. Stuff like student card, class lists, any correspondence with the university would have just made it a lot easier. Not only because I didn't want to be outed all the time, but also because it's very invalidating. Every email that you get says, Miss, and with your old name. And every time you see that, it does hurt. So having those things changed would have made a huge difference to me, personally.
Well, I think it's still a difficult point in time for trans and gender diverse people in any area of society, but particularly in the university society, which is often a microcosm of what society is really like. It can be a space that makes you quite anxious about how you choose to express yourself, how you choose to reveal your identity to your direct surroundings, and things such as gendered bathrooms, res allocations, and university extracurricular activities can become a very anxious activity to try and form a part of these institutions. So often trans and gender diverse people might withdraw from that university culture, withdraw from that physical space in order to kind of move through the system in a way that best ensures that their identity is not scrutinized more than it needs to be as they try and pass through the system and get to the finish line and get their degrees.
Gender roles tend to be so strictly enforced in general that you can't really escape it anywhere. And UP was no different, but I don't think it was really much worse than anywhere else. But I also didn't participate in things that did require, more gender roles. more strict gender role presentation. So I did remove myself from those kind of situations. But in general, just going around daily life on campus, there wasn't too much to be bothered by, in my experience at least. But the general enforcement of gender roles is very strict. And for someone who's presenting differently, you can get a few funny looks on campus, stuff like that. But otherwise, I didn't really experience anything negative myself.
I think there are definitely some challenges that will still continue to be raised, particularly in the race space. I think there is a tradition which kind of creates this expectation of what masculinity is like within the res environment and what femininity is like within the res environment. And because of these traditions that are still ongoing, we see often that people who are placed in residences will have to be a part of activities that sometimes enforce gender roles and gender narratives. And some questions can rise up about what is the reasoning behind continuing with some of these practices and activities, as well as dividing people across gendered lines. So expecting men to be masculine and to go outside girls' races for certain activities, and for girls to follow suit and retaliate. What is the reasoning behind some of these activities? And I think, why is gender the focus in often how we socially organize that space? I think that is one of the things that we should be looking at and discussing going forward. How do we come to a point where we have a more inclusive race culture that looks at people across different spectrums of gender identity and gender expression? And how can we develop cultures and activities that reflect this inclusive environment? The trans protocol is a very important introduction to the university's discourse on gender narratives and how we organize our space according to who we see in our space. And it's a great way to bring exposure to trans and gender diverse people who are already on campus and don't have mechanisms to kind of access that recognition for the specific set of rights that they would need to access within the space. It starts a conversation about what the future of UP will look like, not just for staff and students, but for anyone who interacts with the space. I think it's important because it brings awareness to the reality that there are trans and gender diverse people in society, and any educational or academic discourse that we have needs to center experiences of trans and gender diverse people alongside the everyday heterosexual cisgendered person that we normally see visible in spaces such as this. The trans protocol is something that the unit is very proud to be a part of, because I think it symbolizes a transformation in our university society. So although our work spreads across the region and focuses on different pushes towards realizing the rights for LGBTI people across different spectrums of what that could mean in the direct environment they're a part of, I'd like to think that bringing the conversation to our doorstep within the university framework has given us an opportunity to directly see how a change in policy can impact the real rights that people interact with every single day when they're on campus. How does it affect your day-to-day life?
The original inspiration for the trans protocol was when Ivor came to the centre to start asking me about what the university can do to help him manage and navigate his time at UP as a trans person. But in fact, if I'm truthful, I think I had a more personal connection to the idea of a protocol or a way of thinking about UP life that was more inclusive. And that's because I think I've grappled with my own gender presentation and identity most of my life. So although I identify as mostly cisgender, as a gay man who has been misgendered in his life in significant times and periods, I'm very acutely aware of what it's like when society looks at you as a person and has question marks about where you fit in terms of your presentation as a man or as a woman. And I think that experience has led me to the point where I've questioned the need for a very strict and firm gender binary or boundary. It's led me to question why we police the borders and limits of gender presentations. And I think at the end of the day, those experiences have led me to the point where I'm interested in being in a place, a workplace like the University of Pretoria, where gender diversity is unremarkable, where we all feel we are part of this community, where our gender isn't policed or remarked upon. And in fact, you just feel this is a space in which I feel included and welcomed, and nobody has any particular question marks about who you are or how you present yourself to the world. And so, in a way, that was part of my inspiration, is that I want this community to be welcoming for all people. People like me, people who are trans, people who are gender diverse, people who are just questioning, or people who are just who they are. The development of the trans protocol was very much a collaborative process. So as I've mentioned, Ivor came to me as a student, and that sort of kick-started the process for me. I then approached Dr. Madiba, who's the Director of Student Affairs, and she said to me, why don't you put together a working group and come up with some kind of guideline or protocol document which we could then consider taking through the approvement processes at UP. So I did just that. So we had we consulted with the Student Counselling Unit, the Student LGBTI group Up and Out. We included Speak Out UP, which was a group formed around gender-based violence. We included Residence Affairs. We included the Transformation Office. We included the SOGIESC unit at the Centre for Human Rights, particularly Taruna Naidu, who was then a student, but has now come to represent that unit. And we sat together over many months trying to draft and put together this particular protocol. So what you see at the end is a product of many voices and many ideas. Ultimately, the protocol was then taken up to the Institutional Transformation Committee, which Dr. Madiba was now chairing. And as a result of it being presented there, it was then sent to transformation committees across a number of faculties for comment and feedback. And all of that was incorporated into the final document, which, as I say, is very much a collaborative output. And finally, that is the product that was adopted by the executive. The trans protocol really is to kickstart a conversation about what would make an inclusive space for trans and gender diverse people. But it has a number of specific areas it focuses on. Firstly, people who identify as trans and want to announce their transness to the university community can get assistance and support in doing that. If there is some kind of gap between their legal changes to their name and their gender marker, then again, the university can support them during that period. For students, they can now identify on a number of online platforms with their name, their pronouns, their gender title, in whatever way that they wish, and that is now permitted in terms of the trans protocol. The protocol makes space for anti-discrimination, anti-stigma work to happen. It explores the question of gender-neutral bathrooms. While it does not make all bathrooms gender-neutral, it does state that in a progressive way, the university will try to make more gender-neutral bathrooms accessible across a number of spaces. And then on the question of residence accommodation, the protocol at this stage doesn't outline a specific strategy for trans or gender diverse students who find themselves in a residence where, for example, their gender identity is at odds with the particular gendered space that they find themselves in. that at the very least what the protocol does is it enables anti-discrimination, anti-stigma work and starts the conversation for how going forward the university could consider spaces which are accommodating and welcome for people who identify as trans or who are in some way on a gender spectrum. And ultimately, what we would also like the trans protocol to do is to keep a conversation going about the gendered nature of all spaces and how questions of gender and gender diversity can be incorporated into the everydayness of, let's say, a department's life, how people talk to and address each other, how the needs and ideas and perspectives of trans and gender diverse people are accommodated and included, how we might think about gender and gender diversity in relation to the pedagogical space, or how we might think about gender and gender diversity in relation to our research endeavors. So I think really, if you look at all of those in their totality, what we're hoping is that the protocol really sets in motion a set of processes and conversations and interventions which ultimately free all of us to be just who we are in the university space.
I'm really, really happy that it has been adopted by UP. I think that's a really, really fantastic step forward, because there are a lot of places that are just not safe for trans people. So for at least people coming into this university, it's going to be a lot safer, where there is formal recognition that you exist and that you are protected and that you can express yourself. I think that is amazing. And I'm sure that over time there will be additions to the protocol, things will change, but having this first step is very exciting. And I'm sure that it will help a lot of students, especially as South Africa in general can be pretty hostile to trans people. My experience was quite privileged, probably because, first of all, I'm white. I had a supportive family. My economic class. I just was lucky enough to move in circles where people were generally quite open-minded. And being at a university, most of the time the people are quite liberal. And I didn't really have to go home to a place that wasn't unsafe. Also, just the fact that I'm a trans man, presenting, as someone who at the time looked female, but was dressing in a masculine way, nobody really bothered me too much about that. So I didn't really experience discrimination based on that, which unfortunately a lot of trans people do. At least having this university as a place where trans people can feel safer, I'm really glad about that.
What I would like to see is the university and all of its members engaging with the protocol and seeing how they can accommodate its requirements in their functioning as departments or centres or work units or workspaces. They're quite specific things that the protocol makes allowance for, but I also think I would like the university and its community to engage seriously with the ideas. Sometimes trans and gender diverse people and issues are presented in language which is sensational or sensationalizing, or you might find in the media space trans stories are used as clickbait to draw people because the particular headlines are salacious in some way. And I think sometimes people think that this question of a small number of people and their needs is frivolous, and they're more pressing and more urgent issues that the university should be dealing with. And I think this is an opportunity to ask quite serious questions about what kind of space do we want, how can we rethink who we are and what we do, and how can we all be freed in a sense.
When I first got involved with the trans protocol, I was a student activist, and I was really focused on how we could make the university a more inclusive space for LGBTI people, a safer space for women, for people of the female gender on campus, and also just like bringing the political discourse into this like closeted conservative society that I felt the university space was. And it became more apparent while we were developing the protocol that this is something that people need. I think a lot of trans and gender diverse students at that time were kind of used to flying under the radar, or just being more closed off to the way that they express themselves with their personal sense of style and fashion and how they style their hair, just because they know that this is a conservative environment. And during the development of the protocol, I had a close friend of mine start to experiment more with her dressing. And over time, she actually came out to our group of friends and told us that she is trans, she is a trans person, she is ready to be addressed by the correct pronouns, and she would like our support as she kind of navigates figuring out how she fits into society as a trans woman, having been socialized to think that she was something else for her whole life. So that experience kind of made the process more personal to me, because knowing that this is my friend and knowing more about some of the specific challenges she's experienced kind of was motivation as to why we didn't let this thing go, and why we had to keep talking about it, keep talking about the needs of trans and gender diverse students, in order to ensure we get to a point in time where it's not a question when you're applying for university, is this a space where I can finally start to explore my identity or not, or is this a space I can safely come out in or not? And I hope that we're taking steps towards that, and that people start, when they're applying for university, thinking about, oh, I would want to go to UP because I think it's more of an inclusive space for people who are trans, gender non-conforming, non-binary, whatever it may be that your identity is. We'd like to see that this eventually becomes a more inclusive space that becomes the option for everyone.
The trans population is likely to always be very small, but the difference that you can make to a trans person by relatively small changes, these are not huge things, they do not require vast overhauls of systems, or you don't need to put in a lot of infrastructure just to change these things that will make daily life for a trans person much better. And considering the fact that for most trans people, daily life can actually be pretty difficult, I think that it's a really wonderful thing if universities and institutions can recognize that this group of people struggles with all kinds of matters that most other people don't even think about at all. So you can have huge reward for a relatively low input, and I think by all means, if we can do that for trans people or any other group of people, then we absolutely should.